If I made a drama about gun control laws, I don't think I can get to the same audience I can with the Purge movies. So it's a great way to smuggle these ideas into.
So I have this pattern where I watch a movie and I'm kind of meh. Then I go online to see what other people thought and immediately become extremely defensive of the movie after I read some uncharitable comments. I almost made an entire Reddit account once just to defend the ending of Gerald's Game, a movie I thoroughly hated, but to be clear, would have been significantly worse if it had ended at the car crash. I think this pattern of mine is a lot of why I keep engaging with the Purge franchise despite not being entirely sure I enjoy it. I think I liked the first two on my initial viewing, and all of the movies have grown on me with rewatches. The TV show, unfortunately, has not. But it's a franchise where I watch the new thing that gets released, then go online to read absolutely ridiculous takes. Like, I think reading a few more tweets requesting a bank robbery during the Purge will actually radicalize me. I don't know why anyone thinks a heist movie would be more interesting if the heist was legal. Never mind that the Purge franchise literally gave them what they wanted in the second season of the TV show and then was promptly canceled because no one watched it. And people still won't stop asking for the bank robbery movie.
We got robbed.
But this isn't even about the bank robbery thing. While nobody thinks the messaging in these movies is subtle,
I always say the Purge movies are not subtle in any way.
People don't really agree on what the messaging is trying to say, much less if it's successful. Are the Purge movies police propaganda? A direct attack on the NRA? Maybe it's about living in a society. Maybe as filmgoers, we're still overthinking it. It's just a series of random images and sounds James DeMonaco pulled out of his ass.
I'm a Fellini fanatic, so this was kind of my ode to the absurdity of Fellini films that always inspired me.
But what I think really sent me over the edge into making an excessively long video on the franchise is that people won't stop comparing things to The Purge.
In fact, Los Angeles is like the movie Purge.
This is a wake-up call. Chicago is living the Purge.
Madness. It was like the scene of the Purge where everyone goes out and goes crazy and just does anything they want to do.
Social media is abuzz with talk of a purge, hours of lawlessness and unrest.
One night a year, all crime is legal. Greg.
What is the Purge?
That is the Purge, yeah.
For anyone unfamiliar with The Purge, be sure to comment below and let me know which video this autoplayed after. The Purge franchise is set in an alternate universe where a political party called the New Founding Fathers of America, here on out referred to as the NFFA, take power over the United States in 2014, and then 3 years later in 2017 pass the 28th Amendment declaring a national holiday called the Purge. During the 12-hour span of this holiday, there are no laws except for a select few, so when people in the franchise say they are, quote, purging, they are referring to celebrating the holiday by going out at night and partaking in those activities that would normally be criminalized.
But I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not breaking any law.
Now, compare that to this description of Ottawa's trucker convoy in protest of Canadian COVID vaccine mandates.
It almost felt like you were in something like The Purge because though I didn't often see direct acts of violence, there was a certain chaos on the street.
I think this description perfectly articulates the aesthetics of The Purge that people latch onto when they describe something as Purge-like. Protests get compared to The Purge a lot. In 2020, I read so many tweets describing protests in the wake of George Floyd as being like The Purge. Most of the footage that gets compared to The Purge tends to be people just breaking laws. In 2015, a Baltimore riot was not only compared to The Purge, but also blamed on a 15-year-old trying to copy The Purge. How would a group of 15-year-olds copy The Purge? Do they have the legislative power to decriminalize a wide swath of violent acts? Do they just copy actions from The Purge movies? Shootings, masks, build a guillotine? Also, how responsible this 15-year-old's flyer was is still debated. The first confirmed instance of spread of the flyer was by the Baltimore Sun on Twitter. That was also the post which led police to show up in full riot gear planning to cut off teenagers who were presumed to be purging.
The students say they felt backed into a corner, and the majority of Douglas students were just trying to get home but found themselves stranded because the MTA stopped bus and train service at Mondawmin.
Of course, we had those individuals who decided they wanted to join the crowd and left school early, who were punished for that. But Frederick Douglass let out at 4. They had shut down the trains, they shut down the buses. At 4 o'clock, the bell rings. We're all over there. Okay, so we're looking around. Douglass students have nowhere to go.
Which, I don't know if you've ever encountered a teenager, but they respond really well to violent escalation. Absolutely foolproof strategy. Please subscribe for more helpful tips on handling unruly purging teens. I don't know what would have happened if the police hadn't shown up to block those kids from getting on the bus or going to the mall or whatever. I try not to delve too deep into counterfactuals, which will be very difficult throughout this video, which we'll see is largely about counterfactuals. What did happen was that a riot broke out and a lot of local business owners sued the Baltimore Police Department. Are teenagers breaking into storefronts purging? Based on my perusing of social media, a lot of people would say yes, because they use the purge to be synonymous with crime, which is bizarre because, as anyone who has ever watched the movies or TV show can tell you, there is basically no crime on purge night. That's like the whole point.
I'm not breaking any law.
How you purge in the movies is to exercise your rights to purge.
It's my right!
Teenagers breaking laws, even in mass, is not purging. But apparently, if even one crime is committed and the criminal is not immediately shot...
How do you plead?
Not guilty!
Grenade.
Someone out there will think it is exactly like the purge.
Now we can have the trial. Just the two of us.
Just the two of us.
To give you an example of this attitude I'm talking about, there was a tweet I came across during the summer of 2021 when I was looking for opinions on the then recently released
Forever Purge!
And it was so dumb that it has lived in my head rent-free ever since. It cited a crime that happened on June 19th that year with the claim that Juneteenth, a US holiday that takes place on June 19th, might as well be called the Purge. So not sure if this person just thought Juneteenth only started existing in 2021, or if crime just stops on other holidays. When someone inevitably gets shot on Christmas this year, are they going to suggest renaming that holiday? Further, a lot of the crimes that people compare to the Purge get tried through the court system. Not all of them.
Because apparently the DAs in New York have gotten together and said, you know what, this is too complicated. We're not able to prove everybody was there, so let's just drop a lot of these cases.
Notice that the majority did not have their charges dropped, so they aren't even getting away with anything. It's just not immediate on-the-spot justice.
Now we can have the trial.
Just the two of us.
And this misunderstanding of the purge was so rampant that a law passed in Illinois during 2021 removing mandatory cash bail actually got the nickname the Purge Law.
If you've ever heard about the new Safety Act, or the so-called, quote, Purge Law, as it's known on social media, don't really know what it is, you're not alone. The bill, which takes effect on January 1st, has a lot of people divided. A key element of the bill is it eliminates cash bail.
For those fortunate enough not to be familiar, cash bail refers to the practice of only releasing people awaiting trial after they put up money as collateral. This is also called a bail bond. They then get the money back after the trial if they show up. There is an entire bail bondsman industry that exists in many states to front you the money for a fee and then hunt you down if you don't show up in court so they can get that money they loaned you back. And I should mention, people had criticisms of the Safety Act beyond abolishing cash bail, but it was the abolishment of cash bail that caused the outcry of it being purge-like.
Illinois is eliminating a thing called cash bail, which effectively means it's a way to keep criminals in jail or detained as they get worked out through detention or trial.
Why do they need to go through trial at all if you already know they've committed the crime?
The law!
And if they've been charged with a forcible offense, the judge can still detain them, just can't make their detainment dependent on how much money they can pay. They would either be safe to be released or not. But apparently, some people think the dystopian part of the purge was the low incarceration rate.
In And so I get that point about being poor and not being able to afford, say, the bail amount. But there's that one little thing about it that says you're a criminal.
At any given moment, there are hundreds of thousands of people in the US sitting behind bars who have not been convicted of any crime, and most of them were not even charged with a violent crime. But, according to a lot of people online, Illinois' no longer forcing these people to pay money for freedom is exactly like the Purge. Later on in 2021, the Governor Greg Abbott of Texas reacted by signing a bill called the Damon-Allen Act, doing the opposite and removing the possibility of personal bonds or cashless bail for all violent crimes.
The Damon-Allen Act ensures Texas communities are safe and secure by making it harder for dangerous criminals to be released on bail, said Governor Abbott. Texas cities will not follow the lead of Portland, Seattle, and Minneapolis. Texas will remain a law and order state and continue using every tool available to preserve the safety that Texans deserve.
When you're in Texas, look behind you, 'cause that's where the Rangers gonna be.
The name of the law they passed is the Damon-Allen Act. Damon Allen was a Department of Public Safety trooper who was killed in the line of duty on Thanksgiving Day back in 2017.
And it is worth mentioning that the shooter had actually posted his bail of $15,000, so is not related to personal bonds or cashless bail at all. But to be completely fair to Abbott and his claim that this bill would close the
revolving jailhouse door,
the law also
creates a statewide information system to provide judges considering bail with the criminal history of the person who is up for bail.
The judge who granted Allen's murderer bail did not have access to his previous criminal record and thus may have set a higher bail amount the shooter could not have afforded. Now, maybe you're wondering why he called out Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis. 3 cities you could say a lot of true things about, but none of those things would be that they are in Illinois, which is where that Purge bill was passed. When this video started autoplaying, I bet you didn't expect a United States geography lesson. While Illinois was the first state to abolish cash bail, support for bail reform had been building across the country. In 2020, protesters and rioters in the wake of George Floyd's murder were arrested en masse, and various bail charities started using their funds to bail them out. Awareness spread, causing an unreal boost in fundraising, and some of the most active and thus controversial bail charity groups happen to do a lot of bail posting in Portland, Seattle, and Minneapolis. For some context, this CNN article talking about the huge surge in fundraising gives 9 examples of people who were bailed out by these charities only to turn around and be rearrested for murder before their initial hearing. Something that could not have happened if they had not had bail posted for them. 7 of these 9 examples were in the cities of Portland, Seattle, and Minneapolis. In April of that same year, Bill Maher claimed that
Portland, it's a cautionary tale, because we do not want to live in a world without police. Then it's the Purge every night.
Personally, I found the actual Purge franchise rather heavy on cops. Maybe that's where the police propaganda accusations come from. And Babylon Bee had a joke the year before about Seattle doing a reverse purge, where they would actually enforce laws for one night a year. Which again, people aren't actually breaking laws on Purge night.
I'm not breaking any law.
Not sure why I'd have to keep repeating that. I guess a lot of people missed the beginning, middle, and end of all of the movies and the 2 seasons of the TV show. That's fine, but it is weird to keep referencing media you've never seen. And there have been so many clips from Minneapolis in the wake of George Floyd's murder that were uploaded online with captions relating them to the Purge. Though the one clip that I remember without looking up was from a year later in 2022 of someone shooting off fireworks at people from a moving car on July 4th, which are illegal fireworks the Purge now because I got some bad news for Greg on the current state of Texas.
When you're in Texas, look behind you, 'cause that's where the Rangers gonna be.
2 years after Governor Greg Abbott set his state apart from the purging of Portland, Seattle, and Minneapolis, by closing those revolving doors, he delivers the 2023 State of the State address for Texas, in which he announces his new priority.
One of the most dangerous places is one you would least expect.
It's a courtroom with an activist judge, using low bail to let dangerous criminals back out onto the streets. Last September, a law enforcement officer in Harris County was murdered by a criminal out on bail from a prior murder charge. Harris County's revolving bail practice is literally killing people.
Revolving door bail practice.
Revolving jailhouse door.
I guess the first bill wasn't able to close it. The murder he's talking about in the 2023 address is that of Omar Urson, a 37-year-old Houston police officer shot off duty on his way home after picking up dinner for his wife and 7-year-old daughter. The two men charged with his murder were each out on their own $75,000 bonds for murder, to be clear, 2 separate gun murders, which means that they would have each been required to pay a minimum of $7,500 to a bondsman for freedom before trial.
Harris County justice system failed my child.
So you feel like if these guys were still behind bars from their first murder, then your son would still be here today?
Yes, indeed. That's the truth. That's without a doubt.
I imagine most people in his parents' situation would be furious. And a really common symptom of the trauma of grief is counterfactual thinking. What if those two men had still been in jail? What if he had picked something up different for dinner? We don't actually know how much they would have been able to pay to get out successfully, or if it would have been enough if only one of them bonded out. These are just more counterfactuals. Perhaps if things had been different in these men's lives growing up, they wouldn't have even killed their first victims, much less Omar. Even with bonds they could not have paid, 2 men were still murdered prior. Kelvin Shepard was shot a few months shy of his 21st birthday, and Devin Wood was still a teenager when he was killed.
We were just so frustrated and so angry that his life meant that little. The judiciary that we do have in office right now, something needs to change.
But the irony for the people who see this as Purge-like is that the higher these financial penalties, the more like the Purge Texas would be.
When you're in Texas, look behind you.
But what about our viewers who are on a budget?
Oh, well, sure thing. There are a few tried and true ways to keep your home safe during the purge for little or no money. With some construction paper and tape, you can create a low-cost window blackout.
Despite the misleading title of the second movie, The Purge is not actually an anarchist system where there are no laws, but a totalitarian government regime. The second season of the TV series even has a side plot where a guy gets the death penalty over a technicality.
Initiate liquidation protocol.
It was over that bank robbery that clearly no one saw. So this idea that to be like the Purge is to not imprison is frankly silly. The government has defined crime in a way that only protects a select few people. That's the absurdity of their near 0% crime rate.
You know, I'm a Fellini fanatic.
The characters in these movies are clinging to crime statistics as a measurement of success when people are being slaughtered in the street. But I think the biggest source of confusion about what the Purge movies are trying to say is that the visuals in these movies feel very, Second Amendment for a franchise that is allegedly anti-gun. So here's where I'll defend people for missing that it was supposed to be pro-gun control. I don't think anyone walks away from one of these movies thinking they're glad they don't own a gun. Instead, it seems like the person with the most guns and ability to use them is usually who survives. If anything, people are more likely to come out of the theater wondering why anyone would go out on Purge night without a gun. A lot of these movies play out like an NRA talking point. You know, the only thing that can stop a bad guy with a gun is a bad guy with a gun. This isn't a coincidence. The lead of the second and third movies was largely designed around the idea of a Clint Eastwood gunslinger figure. Now, they chose the outlaw Josie Wales, which, at the risk of spoilers, is largely about a man whose search for vengeance begets more vengeance. It's a decidedly anti-vengeance movie, much like The Purge. But also like The Purge, there's a lot of violence. Think like First Blood, but instead of the police being the antagonist, it's Union soldiers? Wait, are we supposed to be on the Confederate side in this movie?
All the training the Confederate Army gave me is useless against Forever Purge!
I don't know about this one. The worst take I came across, not from some random JK trolling on Twitter, came from The Federalist, a fairly pro-gun media source. The article claimed that the NFFA couldn't be tyrannical fascists because they didn't take the guns away like real tyrannical fascists. Because, you know, that's the definition of fascism, someone who takes your guns away. I checked the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition because that's the dictionary Justice Scalia, famously a non-activist judge, and Dictionary Connoisseur cited for the definition of a sandwich. And you know what? I didn't see any mention of guns. I don't know. Maybe Merriam-Webster has gone woke. Scalia did feel the need to complain about Webster's third for including 2 different definitions of modify based on usage. Usage dictionaries are for activist judges. Checkmate, Merriam-Webster. Anyway, the Federalist take is very much based on a certain interpretation of the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which grants the right to keep and bear arms since a well-regulated militia was considered necessary to the security of a free state. A lot of people read this amendment as saying that the people in compounds training fringe militia groups around the country are the only thing keeping the U.S. from being taken over by a fascist dictatorship. And I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you are living in the U.S., the government can literally bomb your house. It's been done. People don't even make it out of shootouts with the local police department. I think we can all agree the difference maker in single-handedly beating the largest military force in the world isn't going to be that third rifle. I get that people don't want to give up guns that they use and enjoy if they aren't doing anything bad with them.
I'm not breaking any law.
But to be so self-righteous about it, be serious. And if you do decide to try and overthrow the government on Purge night, guess who will have the most resources, including guns?
So the government, rich people, the elites will always have guns.
And the people most likely to try will probably be the people most vulnerable to the Purge, the people with the least guns. The whole political incentive of the Purge is to remove people who are most critical of the NFFA. A fascist dictatorship isn't going to remove guns from themselves. They get to be the good guys with guns. And the Purge movies do go out of their way to underscore that people trying to start a revolution during the Purge are misguided at best. The most positive portrayal is probably in Purge Anarchy, when Dante and Michael K. Williams, rest in peace, save our protagonist in a shootout. Less positively, we have Election Year, where Dante and his boys get chastised by Senator Charlie Roan, who decides that the most important thing is to protect her pro-Purge political opponents from their own laws. Full offense, but maybe your priority should be saving all the people housed in the temporary triage center that's about to be swarmed by a militia. Like, I would have voted for her, but it would have been a lesser of the two evils thing. And there's a lot of portrayals of poor and working class people trying to kill the rich only for them to get killed later. We also see people getting offed during the Purge for trying to speak out against the NFFA. None of these people end up making a systemic difference using guns or violence on Purge night. And part of why I was so taken aback by this article is that it's such a relic. It really makes me appreciate how political talking points shift over time. When I was a kid, I used to hear similar arguments against gun control brought up a lot because I grew up in the 90s when the American militia movement was seeping into the conservative mainstream after standoffs in Waco, Texas and Ruby Ridge. But then in 2008, the Supreme Court case District of Columbia versus Heller basically codified the individualist interpretation of the Second Amendment, which I think the Purge is a more direct critique of. The individualist interpretation being that people should be able to own firearms for their personal rights to self-defense, and not just within the confines of when it supports state militias.
It's my right!
Seems a bit ahistorical to me, since no one seems to have interpreted that way until the 1960s, and militias would literally commandeer people's guns for militia use, then later because those people were black, but I guess even Antonin Scalia is one of those
activist judge,
as I keep hearing about. Or maybe horseshoe theory applies to constitutional originalism, and at some point you're so originalist that you rely on your own a priori knowledge of OFFA's original intent. But don't worry, the decision did allow for exemptions to these laws for rights to self-defense for felons and the mentally ill.
Our opinion should not be taken to cast doubt on long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill.
Which, can I just say, if you're trying to tell me that a right to guns is a right to self-defense, then immediately follow up by telling me that mentally ill people shouldn't have them, that's kind of messed up.
None of us support people who are crazy, who are a danger to themselves, who are a danger to others, getting their hands on a firearm. None of us support people who are crazy. I'm fighting for you. I'm fighting for all of you.
I mean, you're not fighting for all of us.
Do you guys want to stop mentally insane individuals from getting firearms?
Do the mentally ill cease to have rights to self-defense? Like, what the hell? If anything, we should be giving them more guns since they're statistically less safe. And self-protection is the main reason for gun ownership in the Purge.
Don't come back here, we have guns and we will shoot you!
No one is going to overthrow the government during the Purge. The Purge society is designed in such a way that people are either buying guns to shoot their neighbor.
I told you,
not to park in front of my house.
Or buying guns to protect themselves from their neighbor by, once again, shooting their neighbor. The reasoning matches a lot with the reasons people in this universe are given for why they should buy guns.
I thought that, there's always going to be somebody out there that's armed, and it would be good to also be armed.
The left's message is absolutely clear. They want revenge. You've got to be punished. They say you're what's wrong with America, and now you've got to be purged.
When homelessness runs rampant, when gangs dominate entire communities, and when radical district attorneys refuse to prosecute violent crime in cities across America, rarely has the Second Amendment been more necessary to secure the rights of our fellow citizens.
Using the Second Amendment to stop homelessness, huh?
Homelessness runs rampant.
Kinda surprised to hear Ted Cruz advocate for such radical squatters' rights.
Frankly, they can kiss my ass.
No, okay.
When you're in Texas, look behind you.
Ted Cruz is a man who talks about guns as a guarantor of freedoms, but he also called the overturning of Roe a return of power to the American people, and it doesn't really seem like those states' rights have trickled down to his constituents.
Just 4 months pregnant, her water broke, losing the amniotic fluid her baby needed to survive. Her doctor told her,
"You're 100% for sure going to lose your baby."
Because of anti-abortion laws in Texas, they couldn't terminate the pregnancy, even though Amanda was at a high risk for developing a life-threatening infection.
Any private citizen can walk in the court and say, I think Dr. Smith performed an abortion.
And even when doctors can prove the fetus was dead, the doctor still has to be responsible for their own legal fees.
And I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "We're moving you to the ICU." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "You're developing symptoms of sepsis."
And now, Amanda may not be able to have another child because her uterus is so scarred from the infection.
When we say states' rights, we truly mean only state governments have rights. But at least the constituent of his who was turned away for treatment for her deadly and unviable ectopic pregnancy can find comfort that she doesn't live in a real dystopia where someone tells her she can't carry an AR-15 at the mall. Like, sure, maybe she dies, but at least she dies free, with a gun in each hand.
When you're in Texas, look behind you.
This is Purge-like. This is purgy. In the universe I, and I assume you, live in, America has people who want more gun restrictions because they feel unsafe when the people around them have guns, and it also has people who want fewer gun restrictions because they feel safer with a gun, because again, the people around them might have guns. Like, I don't know, the
Terrorists, and there are home invaders, drug cartels, carjackers,
them too.
knockout gamers, and rapers, and haters, and campus killers, airport killers, shopping
I mean,
mall
we really could
killers,
name places that mass shootings have happened all day, but both sides of the debate still talk a lot about just wanting to feel safe, especially when threatened by other people with guns. This is why every mass shooting ends with all politicians doubling down, yet I can only assume that people who are counting on guns for their safety are expecting to have access to guns, ammo, and the physical capability to protect themselves with a gun. But a right to bear arms neither guarantees ownership of arms nor proficiency in using them. American citizens have the right to legal representation, and the government provides that if asked in court. But where can I, an American citizen, request a firearm? If I truly have the right to bear arms, where are my arms? Dear U.S. government, I am using my right to petition to ask for my God-given right of arms, plural. The U.S. government isn't handing out guns unless you sign up to work for them, like a good guy. And that seems to imply that guns are a commodity that people have the rights to purchase rather than a right itself. This is probably because it's a fairly modern idea that the Second Amendment is at all related to ownership of guns. Instead, it was seen as relating to the state militias that colonial America had in place of a standing federal army. You could bear arms by going to the state's public armory, getting state-owned arms, and using them to fight within state militias. The state literally did give you arms in that case. And the Purge America in particular is built off of a system that ensures an unequal ownership among the population. On paper, everyone in the Purge universe has the same rights, But realistically, safety is a commodity that many people cannot afford. If you can't access as many resources as your neighbor, then you don't get to be as safe as your neighbor, which is also kind of true in this universe.
Kiss my ass.
Luckily, they have advocates like Ted Cruz trying to give them guns. I mean, yeah, shelter probably would have been better use of government funds, but with enough guns, I'm sure their options will open up.
When you're in Texas, look behind you.
This is not a guns for everyone agenda.
Oh my god, Dana, we get it. Please stop, Dana. This is so uncool. And it's not just people with records of mental illness or histories of violence who face more obstacles to buying and learning to shoot guns.
I'm a black woman walking into a gun store. I was the only one there. And I think I waited about an hour and a half before someone would come and talk to me.
Black gun owners and the NRA have had a contentious relationship for generations. In 1967, in response to the Black Panther Party legally and openly carrying loaded guns, the NRA actually supported gun control legislation. Old wounds were reopened in 2016 when registered gun owner Philando Castile was shot and killed by a police officer.
Told him not to reach for it. I told him to get his hand out.
You told him to get his ID, sir, and his driver's license.
In this universe, guns are not some great equalizer, as many pro-guns for self-protection proponents will tell you, but we are still assured that if we are monetarily and physically able to own a gun, we can be safe. Safe from what, though? Even if we take the Second Amendment to be about gun ownership, who are we given the right to bear arms against? As Gary Willis is often quoted as saying, one does not bear arms against a rabbit.
What's up, Doc? Over.
When you think of gun control, there are lots of folks on the left that say, look, let's just get rid of all the guns. What that would mean is 500,000 to 1 million more people are victims of crime, are victims of rape, of murder, and assault.
A cursory Google will return multiple articles with the bold claim that guns are used more for self-defense than crime. Which is funny, because that's actually true in the Purge.
Oh, low crime rate strikes again.
I'm a law-abiding citizen.
Just the two of us.
And if that is true, that kind of implies that at least some of the defensive gun usage was in response to non-gun crimes.
I told you not to park in front of my house.
Which might suggest that those crimes could have been stopped without the escalation of using a gun. And yes, I realize you can use a gun defensively against a bear attack, but the majority of gun crimes are not countered by defensive gun uses, so you math that one out. Cruz attributes his stat to...
Comes from the Obama White House.
Alright, so that is truth adjacent. The stat is from a sociologist named Gary Kleck, a man who, if you Google, a picture of a gun comes up before a picture of him. He published a lot of work at the end of last millennium that concluded guns were used defensively at much higher rates than anyone had ever observed. Then in early 2013, a few months after the Sandy Hook massacre, President Obama announced his Now is the Time plan to combat gun violence, which among other things ordered a survey on gun research by national academies to determine which areas of gun violence prevention research should be prioritized. The 500,000 number Ted used shows up on page 16 of the 110-page survey under Defensive Use of Guns. Estimates of annual uses ranging from about 500,000 to more than 3 million. Kleck, 2001a. But let the jury note that the larger paragraph also cites the, quote, radically lower numbers from the 1997 National Crime Victimization Survey, but that wasn't the number Cruz attributed to the White House. Later on, page 45, in the section on protective effects of gun ownership, they cite even more studies with even lower numbers of defensive gun usage. You may also notice that Gary Kleck's name appears pretty much every time a positive gun stat shows up. These broader numbers given by the National Academy Survey also used to be referenced by the CDC website until about 6 months before that interview with Cruz. When the CDC took the numbers down, they actually drew accusations of censorship. Personally, I wouldn't call the CDC's removal of 30-year-old stats censorship, but maybe just updating the website. Since the Obama White House was a dud, I went to the website for the legislative branch of the NRA, something checks and balances. They had this convenient tab titled Why Gun Control Doesn't Work, so I clicked on it, and looked at their fact sheet, which shares the fact that mass murders have repeatedly been deterred or stopped by citizens carrying lawfully concealed firearms. Which is true. I can think of several examples off the top of my head, so maybe we will learn about these and more when I click on the citation. It is a study on mass shootings from 2000, easily the year we would have had the most data about mass shootings. And you can download a PDF of this article, which, hey look, also cites the 1995 study from Gary Kleck and Mark Gertz. This article was written by John R. Lott Jr., an economist who got famous in the late 90s for writing a book called More Guns, Less Crime. When I first started seeing John Lott cited over and over in defense of gun rights and described as Ted Nugent's favorite researcher, I considered reading this book, but then Lott's introduction asks us to consider 2 shootings in which having a gun could have stopped the shooter. Which, maybe I should try to get my counterfactuals published about how if the Avengers were real, they could have swooped in too. His first anecdote, the Killeen, Texas Luby shooting in 1991, is probably the mass shooting that actually had the biggest impact on modern American gun laws. Sorry, Sandy Hook parents.
It all started about 12:40 in the afternoon. The restaurant was packed with people ready to sit down and eat lunch when a man driving a pickup truck rammed into the front restaurant window. He got out and started shooting.
There was one survivor in particular, Susanna Gracia Hupp, who would later estimate that she testified in front of 25 different state governments, and all of those state governments would go on to pass concealed carry, presumably at least partially because of her testimony.
And I reached for my purse. He was maybe 12 feet away. You know, is it possible my gun could have jammed? Sure. Is it possible I could have missed? Sure. But I can tell you I've hit much smaller targets at much greater distances. But then I realized I took my gun out of my purse and left it in my car. Because as you well know, in the state of Texas, it's sometimes a felony offense to carry a gun in your purse.
Both of Susanna's parents were executed by the shooter, and she was haunted by the thought that she could have saved them and others if she had just had the gun she typically carried for self-defense.
As I mentioned, I'm not really mad at the guy that did this. And I'm certainly not mad at the guns that did this. They didn't walk in there by themselves and pull their own triggers. The guy that did it was a lunatic. That's like being mad at a rabid dog. I'm mad at my legislators for legislating me out of the right to protect myself and my family.
When I was watching clips on YouTube of some of her testimonies, I actually came across this comment by someone who claims to have started carrying his gun into Texas restaurants after the incident. A more cynical person probably would make a joke here about
radical district attorneys.
But I'm not that cynical because, look, if I was huddled behind one of those Luby's tables, I too would have wished she'd had that gun to take that guy out. Would it have worked? I don't know. But it sounds better than trying to defend myself by throwing Jell-O in cafeteria trays. And if I was on a jury for that man from the YouTube comment section, I don't think I would have convicted. Like, sure, it was illegal to carry a gun into a restaurant, but he was just carrying in self-defense. That feels like an understandable, and at least in this case, victimless crime. And despite that clip I just played, I think Cruz would agree with me because, you know what? Maybe we're all just
radical district attorneys.
The ensuing fight that Susanna started over concealed carry laws in Texas is considered to be what cost the last Democratic governor of Texas re-election.
The big issue was guns. I lost votes among Democratic stalwarts because I did not believe that there should be a law in Texas that allowed you to carry guns in your pocket.
Ann Richards was defeated by future President George W. Bush, who upon election would enact the concealed carry law Richards had been criticized for vetoing. Would the entire course of America have been different if Ann Richards had been reelected? I don't know. Another counterfactual. Maybe if the Avengers had stopped the Luby shooting, 9/11 wouldn't have happened. Who's to say? Lott's other anecdote is not even from the US and honestly reads like he thinks we should arm school children. He then assures us that law-abiding citizens have used guns to stop gun-toting attackers at schools, restaurants, offices, and stores, and cites his other work from 2000 if you want a list. Unfortunately, this citation is actually not listed in his bibliography. Really, Ted, this is your favorite researcher?
Ignorance is acceptable.
In the footnotes, Lott does list 2 more examples. First, the 1997 Pearl High School shooting in Pearl, Mississippi, in which the school's assistant principal used a rifle to keep the shooter from leaving the scene of the crime. And Lott calls out Dan Rather specifically for not mentioning the shooter was detained with a gun. Dan Rather's really out here catching strays, pun intended. The second example is the Parker Middle School shooting in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania, where a local chased after the fleeing shooter with a shotgun. Of course, Lott claims that all 600 news stories got it wrong, and the local actually stopped the shooter as he was reloading and not after he escaped through an exit door. I don't know, since I was not there, but unlike Lott, many of these newspapers cited their sources, so I'm inclined to believe the 600 of them over him. But even if I believed him, that would be 1 out of 4 anecdotes in which a mass shooting was stopped by a civilian with a gun. Remember, this article was cited as a source for that claim. Actually, it was more specifically a lawfully concealed gun, which I don't think a rifle would have been in any state at that time. To add insult to injury, later on page 13, he brings up the Pearl High School shooting again, and then reminds us that he has already given us multiple examples where the shooters have been stopped by citizens and thus presumably prevented from doing more harm. And at this point, I'm starting to feel pretty gaslit. Lott even has predictions of how the number of people killed in attacks would decline by as much as 50% in states allowed concealed carry, and guess what? It's been over 20 years since then, and all 50 states do offer some form of concealed carry, so why does the NRA still cite someone's 20-plus-year-old predictions? What in the counterfactual hell is this? Are we supposed to interpret nonsensical predictions until we can claim that they came true? Or do they just not want their supporters to decry censorship when they update their website like the woke CDC? I considered not even mentioning Lott in this video, but I went down such an incredibly long rabbit hole looking for his missing sources, which made me kind of petty. And then I came across this 2022 article by Mike Spies, and oh my god, I don't have time to summarize this whole article because the video is already way too long, but I will include just a brief reenactment of my favorite part. Okay.
98% of defensive gun usage does not involve firing the gun. That's why everyone else's numbers are so low.
This got the attention of Otis Dudley Duncan, a man I have never heard of in my life, but this article and his Wikipedia page claim is one of history's most important quantitative sociologists, which I want to remind you that while Lott has made his career in peddling gun crime statistics, his academic background is in economics.
I can't find the source for that number. Where did you get it?
Oh, from some polls like Gallup, Los Angeles Times, and Peter Hart Research Associates.
No. I looked at all of those polls and none of them support the 98% number you gave.
Well, the numbers in my book came from a poll I did myself and never mentioned until just now. I would have mentioned it before, but my computer crashed and wiped the hard drive, so I don't have any of the data for anyone to check.
So then this law professor from Northwestern, James Lindgren, who has a quantitative sociology background like Duncan, but doesn't get as much praise on his Wikipedia page, gets involved because he's suspicious about Lott's numbers.
Your numbers imply that 3/8 of one person you surveyed fired a warning shot. How do you survey 3/8 of a person?
I always said it was a small sample size.
Well, can we just go through the phone numbers and redial the people you surveyed?
You can't. I had some undergrads make the calls on their personal phones.
Oh, okay. Then can I have the names of those undergrads so I can ask them for the numbers?
No, I'm bad with names. Sorry.
I guess Lott eventually got tired of having to explain where these bizarre numbers came from because he attempted to redo the survey for his second book, The Bias Against Guns, Why Almost Everything You've Ever Heard About Gun Control is Wrong. Let me guess, is it because people like you make their numbers up? This time he got 1,015 respondents, half as many as his previous survey claimed to have, and only 7 of them claimed to have ever used a gun defensively. But what else would I expect from the statistical genius who started an Indiegogo to fund his crime prevention research center that included this fact in one of his updates asking for money? Interesting fact, 23% of women in 2011 owned a gun in the US, up from 11% in 2004. A linear interpolation would predict that now about 28% of women own guns. A linear interpolation would predict that, but I don't know why you'd do a linear interpolation using 2 random data points, especially since multiple organizations have continued to collect data on the percentage of American women who own guns. This man is a full-time gun researcher who has previously referenced Gallup poll data. He absolutely knows there are other data points outside of the 2004 and 2011 numbers he used in 2014. And even if they were the only data points he knows, that's not enough to assume a linear trend. What an absolute grift.
Ignorance is acceptable.
Sure, Ted. And maybe you're thinking, oh, but it was Jennifer who wrote that. but I'm pretty sure Jennifer is just John Lott pretending to be a woman online again. I really do suggest reading that Mike Spies article. So, if I can't rely on the Obama White House or the NRA, where should I go if I want recent research on defensive gun usage? A lot of the articles that came up in that cursory Google search I mentioned cited the 2021 National Firearms Survey, which interviewed 16,000 gun owners, of whom a little over 30% claimed to have had used their gun defensively. This survey goes on to apply the stat to all gun owners and sets their estimates at 1.67 million defensive gun incidents per year. You could definitely question how these numbers scale, or if the 31% of these defensive gun uses that were simply mentioning a gun count, since could have just lied to get the same result. I'm most interested in the question they asked to get near a third of people to say they had used them defensively. Have you ever defended yourself or your property with a firearm, even if it was not fired or displayed? Once I took a cross-country road trip with my partner and got lost at night in the middle of the rural Midwest. We stopped at the first house we saw and went to knock on their door to ask how to get back to the interstate before we entirely ran out of gas. The man living there came around from the back of his house with a shotgun. I imagine he would have counted that instance when asked that question. And to be clear, I get it. He doesn't get a lot of strangers visiting him at night. It's not like he threatened to shoot us with his gun, which has also happened to me when I was not attempting to harm anyone or their property. And it seems I'm not the only person this has happened to. Just go to the Amazon Flex Driver subreddit and search gun. This guy even started selling light-up jackets after having 2 different people pull guns on him. Or watch some Cartnark videos where a guy gets threatened for asking people to return their grocery carts in an annoying way.
And I'm a killer.
Well, sir, that's not nice.
I'm fixing to put about 6 right in your forehead.
I guess I'm just not sold that people brandishing guns more frequently is a net positive just because they think it's in self-defense. And I'm even more suspicious when I notice 56% of the people who claim to shoot, display, or mention a gun defensively claim to have done it repeatedly. In fact, if they surveyed the guy who threatened the Cartnark guy, he would have been one of the 56%.
I emptied my gun. I was scared.
After arresting him initially, police let him go.
Let him go?
When you're in Texas, look behind you.
Revolving jailhouse door.
Interesting fact. Linear interpolation. Just kidding. The interesting fact is that a lot of drive-by shooters also claim they acted in self-defense. And that's not just gang-affiliated drive-by shootings. One that made national news came from Austin, Texas in 2020 when an Uber driver from Killeen, remember that place? This is a Texas Geography channel now. When an Uber driver made an illegal turn into a protest, then shot and killed Garrett Foster because Garrett was holding a gun and the driver claimed he would not have had time to shoot in self-defense if he waited for Garrett to point it at him. To make the shooter look even guiltier, a previous text conversation of his was revealed in which he explained how he would be able to claim self-defense to go free if he shot a protester. Also, he said a bunch of explicitly racist stuff, but I think we expected that. In a less expected, but perhaps still unsurprising message, he also confessed to accidentally killing a homeless man, which the cops let him go for.
When you're in Texas, look behind you.
I guess in 2020, those doors still revolved in Texas. This might be why, according to his dad, he doesn't understand why he's still in jail. Forgive the counterfactual, but imagine if he had been held for killing the first person. I'm sorry, Greg, maybe you had a point. Oh, no wait, Greg Abbott tweeted that he was acting as fast as he could to pardon this guy. I guess all politicians will occasionally be
radical district attorneys.
So maybe a lot of the self-defensive gun uses are thinly veiled acts of gun aggression, but what about situations where good guys are actually being attacked by bad guys? The best source I found for a list of mass shootings stopped by a civilian with a gun was from the research wing of Alert, a training solutions provider that prepares law enforcement for mass attacks. Their numbers still don't look great for the good guy with a gun versus a mass shooter, but they do provide actual examples of people stopping a shooter with a gun. Alert looked at 520 active shooter incidents and found that 297 incidents ended before police arrived. Of those, only 26 ended with someone else shooting the assailant. A not insignificant number, especially if that saves your life, but a much smaller number than the times the assailant was subdued without a gun, or the 76 times the shooter shot him or herself. There are people who are alive today that might not have been without a gun. How many, we can't know. It's another counterfactual. 143 cases the attack ended when the shooter just left on their own before police arrived. There are an incredible amount of variables and we'll just never know. However, just like in that Luby's, I think most people would have preferred their chances if one of the victims had a gun. Earlier I said I don't think I would convict that commenter who was carrying a gun in self-defense after hearing about the Luby shooting, and A lot of people who carry a gun claim to do so in self-defense. Dana does. Here's context for that quote I've been clipping only slightly unfairly.
This is not a guns for everyone agenda. This is a guns for innocent, law-abiding Americans who want to exercise their pro-choice right of self-defense bill. That's exactly what this is. Look, I've had my life protected by a firearm. I don't ever want anyone to ever feel as I or anyone on that baseball field has felt.
Like Susanna, Dana only started carrying a gun in self-defense. Both of them point to an incident in which they were victimized as to why their right to carry a gun is so important to them. Though I do want to point out Dana wasn't involved in one of those cases Alert found. And we've already covered that Susanna wasn't, but both of them have a lot of passion about what could have happened.
I was having guilt feelings about certain things, about simply surviving. You know, gosh, maybe I should have stayed longer, maybe I could have gotten my mother out. And I was also having anger. I wasn't having the emotions that a lot of people felt like I should have, which was the incredible grief. It was there, but it was subdued by the anger and the guilt. And by going to that particular debriefing, and the America's Most Wanted program was a similar debriefing, it allowed me to discover that a lot of the other people felt the same feelings.
When people survive traumatic experiences like Dana, they are prone to ruminating on negative counterfactuals about their own survival. What if I had not been wearing my helmet? What if I hadn't seen that other car and didn't hit the brakes? What if the police hadn't shown up in time? But people who are grieving, like Susanna and Omar Ursin's parents, tend to have counterfactuals with positive outcomes. What could have kept their loved ones alive? Since none of this conjecture actually brings anyone back, loved ones are often left trying to change things for the better to bring the deaths of their loved ones meaning. Susanna wants people to be able to defend themselves with guns so that they won't ever have to wonder like she does. Damon Allen's wife was at Greg Abbott's bill signing for that Damon Allen Act in 2021. She did not want her husband's death to be in vain.
It's been an honor to help work on this bill and to make it something Damon would be proud of. This bill will help keep violent offenders like the one who killed him off the streets and make them safer for other officers and for our communities.
The reality is that things could have been different in a lot of ways, though. When Susanna blames her legislators for her parents' murders, the implication is that their deaths were directly caused by that law, but there were a lot of other factors. The shooter had lost his Siemens papers when marijuana was found in his room. Is she upset her federal legislators didn't decriminalize usage so that the shooter could have been out at sea instead? Or maybe he should have been sentenced to harsher punishment than the drug counseling he underwent in Houston, and this is just another example of those revolving doors Greg Abbott is still trying to shut. He also had been harassing his neighbors, who had turned over an especially threatening letter to the police, who claimed it only demonstrated a harmless crush. Of course, even if they had gotten a restraining order, it wasn't until 1994, 3 years after this shooting, that a federal law was passed that disallowed gun ownership among people who have protection orders against them. None of these are the counterfactuals Susanna ruminates over, though, probably because none of them put control of the situation back in her hands. She trusts herself with a gun more than she trusts the laws will be perfectly enforced. Ultimately, it's difficult to argue that everyone should have guns for self-defense when I think we can all name at least one person we wouldn't trust with a semi-automatic rifle, including a lot of the people supposedly acting in self-defense.
These guns were in the hands of bad people that did bad things to good people.
So, a common refrain is, guns don't kill people, people kill people. This line is meant to say that guns are neutral objects that only kill when put in the hands of
bad people
and or violently negligent people, which is sorta true. Guns are not sentient and cannot be found guilty in a court of law. The solution is clearly to keep the guns out of the hands of bad people. But if the Second Amendment is a right to self-protection as suggested by the DC versus Heller decision, who loses the right to self-protection? When Greg Abbott signed the Damon Allen Act, it was about a guy who had previously been convicted of a similar crime. The number one reason someone is denied a concealed carry permit is prior criminal conviction, and even when DC versus Heller was decided, the majority opinion written by our favorite activist Judge Scalia was very clear that it allowed restrictions for felons. Why shouldn't it cast doubt, Scalia? Am I supposed to believe that the old founding fathers of America, here on out referred to as the OFFA, banned felons and the mentally ill? How would they have qualified those? The OFFA were trying to avoid having a standing army and thus wanted to go with a state militia model. Believe it or not, the OFFA wasn't super worried about inner-city gun crime in the 1700s. Thomas Jefferson, the guy who wrote the Second Amendment, did however push banning people who killed deer out of season from carrying guns for 12 months. But even if we could prove that removing guns from criminals is constitutional, it wouldn't matter because, and let's all say it together,
Criminals do not obey the law.
We'll try to get in unison next time. This point is summarized in the NRA legislative branch's helpful Why Gun Control Doesn't Work tab. Criminals don't obey gun control laws. Criminals, by definition, do not obey the law. Gun control laws only affect law-abiding people who go through legal avenues to obtain firearms. I mean, it does affect them if they get arrested for it, but okay. Can you imagine if that argument was used for any other types of legislation? Just imagine someone being like, well, a murderer is gonna murder because by definition, murderers murder, whether or not it's the law, murderers don't care because murderers murder. Merriam-Webster, something, definitions, I'm just looking at crime statistics. Although I do wish Ted Cruz used this logic on some of his own weird trans bills.
Because they're criminals, they're gonna break laws.
Here the word criminal is used as if breaking one law means you will break all laws. This is anecdotal, and maybe I shouldn't confess to crimes in a public forum, but I have jaywalked, like, repeatedly. I'm a real-life serial jaywalker. Also, sometimes I drive over speed limit. I did a rolling stop yesterday. But for all my unrepentant crimes, none of them have escalated to murder. Does that make me a criminal?
Initiate liquidation protocol.
Despite the language repeatedly used to denounce stricter gun laws, we aren't inherently born into some DNA-coded category of criminal or non-criminal.
There are two parallel tracks. One track here, another track there. Here's track one, right? This is the legal firearm ownership track.
Like, there are two men, and one can only commit crimes while the other one must obey every law. You can commit a crime without committing every crime. It's really not that shocking to anyone who has ever interacted with other people before. And they know this. They sometimes even say this part out loud when defending gun rights. So you're saying that someone who wasn't born an inherent criminal might go on to become a criminal? I don't know. Jaywalkers jaywalk, because that's the definition of a jaywalker. Murderers murder. Criminals criminal. Sorry, my brain is literally turning into mush. That's the definition of a criminal jaywalker, someone whose brain is mush. That earlier clip I used of Eric Adams as part of a larger speech about deterring gang violence in New York City. Those were the bad guys with guns he was referring to. A lot of states try to keep guns out of the hands of gangs, which, if I use that Federalist article's definitions, seems a bit fascist. Are gangs not militias? I would say some of them are pretty well regulated, unless you interpret the regulated part to refer to regulation by the tyrannical government they should be free against. And maybe it's because I grew up in the 90s with the normalization of fringe militia groups, but I do find myself awfully sympathetic to these well-regulated militias downtrodden by radical district attorneys for taking up arms against a tyrannical government telling them to hand over their guns. Looking back, it makes sense that the moral panic about gang violence also peaked in the 90s. But the real answer is that the word gang is used to denote a very specific idea. These are the types of people that get placed into the intrinsic criminals bucket, which seems a bit unfair because they overwhelmingly report carrying in self-defense, which is probably true. They are more likely to be subject to violence, especially gun violence, than the general population. And when shootouts ensue, they all claim self-defense because, hey, someone was shooting at them. But the government wants to take their guns away? So here we have the people most likely to feel the need to own a gun for self-defense become the people society least wants to see carry a gun. You may have noticed that legal language is usually about people who are gang-affiliated rather than members per se. This is because gang membership is kind of difficult to define, and that's to say nothing of defining a gang. But what if you were in a gang and then try to leave your gang affiliation behind? You don't magically get perceived as unaffiliated by society. You don't get to move yourself into the non-criminal good guy bin. And I think the obvious inclination is, well, of course, they're criminals. Criminals shouldn't have guns. Criminals are who you use your guns against. This is the same logic that leads police to shoot when they enter a house unannounced, because if you're shooting at police, aren't you automatically the criminal? That's the dichotomy, cops and robbers.
No, prison is for bad guys. You're a bad guy and I'm a good guy.
Yeah, but you can see how, from my perspective, I'm a good guy. Wait, you're a good guy? Oh my gosh.
Ultimately, everyone has the potential to be the bad guy or the good guy in any altercation. Most of the time, it's really something more nuanced. But if you think gun rights are rights to self-protection, you have to come up with an explanation for why some people deserve these rights and others don't.
Well, we have Mr. Rahimi, who is an alleged drug dealer, beat his girlfriend, got a protective order granted against him, and we have a prohibition under 18 USC 922 that says, hey, somebody subject to one of these orders, they do not have a right to purchase or possess or transfer firearms and ammunition.
Well, the Fifth Circuit tells us that there is no historical analog, right? I mean, you cannot restrict someone's Second Amendment rights for simply being under a protective order. It's the opportunity for them to limit Bruin. Potentially, that's what's going to happen, is there's going to be some sort of public safety exception, or in the best public interest exception to the Bruin standard of historical analogs.
Is that bad?
Well, I don't want him to have a gun, right?
If he's so dangerous, why isn't he locked up, though? I'm
I'm
the comment section.
Sure.
And he is the voice of a lot of the comments. I love the dichotomy between the ones who say he should have due process for gun ownership and the comments saying he should be incarcerated before trial. These are our only options. Absolutely no room in the society for people who probably shouldn't carry guns but are otherwise not a societal danger. I don't have a lot of strong convictions around guns, but I do think if someone uses guns recklessly and or threatens to shoot people, they probably shouldn't be allowed to own or carry guns. But that also doesn't mean I think that they should be immediately locked up. And I think the OFFA would agree with me. Not that I actually think that our domestic violence laws should be determined by the opinions of dead slave owners from the 1700s. I truly do not care. The Constitution is alive. Fight me, activist judges. And it also stands out to me that many of these commenters who, I'm gonna make the bold assumption are men, complain about their own problems with women making false claims against them, which, and I mean this both ironically and unironically, isn't that exactly what a bad guy would say? Guns haven't been great equalizers for women in abusive relationships, and laws that supposedly uphold equal rights for all, leading to greater deaths among certain populations, is actually very purgy.
Killers on the loose, like the purge every day. That's what Jim Jordan says about New York, New York.
So people hate Charlie in the first movie. Specifically, a lot of people think he was wrong to endanger the lives of his family by trying to save a stranger. We know Charlie isn't a horror movie, so any act that isn't prioritizing safety is seen as the wrong act. This happens a lot in horror movies. The number of times I've read variations of, I would have gotten out of there right then. No, you probably wouldn't. At least I hope you aren't carrying that level of paranoia and suspicion in your day-to-day life. If you are, I'm sure you won't heed this, but please seek help. That's an exhausting way to live, and it is wreaking absolute havoc on your nervous system. Despite how it may feel at times, we are not living in a horror movie. I brought up that Austin drive-by of Garrett Foster where the shooter shot Garrett before he could point his gun. Do we have any reason to believe Garrett would have pointed his gun at him? No. Also, whether or not he believed Garrett would have shot him, we can't really know, because it's possible that he believed that and was also a bigot with murderous fantasies. But I 100% believe the shooter knew that he would be giving up the option to use his gun if he didn't shoot first. He shoots first, or not at all. And this thought process of it's better to attack first than to wait until I get attacked causes a lot of problems. Horror movie logic is actually pretty bad in day-to-day life. Is it fair for me to think that I wouldn't be able to take a large, unarmed man if he got too close, so I should just shoot him before he's even acted aggressive? No, it sucks that there's always the possibility that someone could overpower me, but that's part of living in a society. I also have to have some trust that the drivers next to me on the road will stay in their lane so I don't preemptively run them off of it. Despite what the NFFA tells you, people need other people. And one of the worst things the Purge does is to implant this constant suspicion in the people around you. We see the normalization of responding to domestic issues with murder. How can you trust your own family? How do you respond empathetically to a stranger in the street after being repeatedly told they would kill you at first opportunity? There's a reason the gun control legislation is perceived more favorably in cities. Even the infamous towns of the Old West, like Tombstone and Dodge City, actually required people entering town to turn their guns in return for a token. The towns usually weren't where the shootouts occurred, despite media suggesting otherwise. Now, there are instances where having a gun is great for personal defense. Those instances are overwhelmingly when you are ending an attack, for example, stopping a mass shooter who has already opened fire, or stopping a wild animal attack. In a lot of cases, brandishing a gun escalates the situation because you are communicating you are willing to kill, and people will not always respond calmly to that. If you are worried about protecting yourself and your family, you should probably learn strategies beyond shooting a gun. But we have this bizarre interpretation of the Second Amendment that tells us that the only way we'll ever feel safe is with more guns. And that's why we now have single-issue voters on gun protections. These politicians are distracting us with gun rights arguments, telling us that as long as we can hold on to these guns, we can't have any rights taken away. Never mind that we would never have perfectly equal access to this supposed right. Meanwhile, they are picking our pockets of actually useful rights and protections. So I guess my point is that the Purge's satire of America's full commitment to self-defense by gun is actually rather on point.
Frankly, they can kiss my ass.
No, okay.
And it's weird that everyone acts like James DeMonico did a bad job. Now, the Purge's attempts to talk about economics is absolutely terrible and makes no sense. I probably should have made a video complaining about that.